In the frigid winter of 1951, a figure fell from the sky into the heart of a North Korean village, his tall, muscular frame silhouetted against the pale moonlight. Clad in dark gear, Sergeant Martin R. Watson landed silently, freezing for a moment as he took in the dimly lit homes around him. Suddenly, every dog in the village began barking furiously, their frantic howls breaking through the silence. Lights flickered on, startled faces peered from doorways, eyes wide with disbelief at the sight of an intruder. Watson felt their gazes like target seekers. Panic surged through him. He had mere moments before the villagers raised the alarm. Instinct kicked in, and he turned, sprinting toward the nearby woods. Just as he reached the tree line, he heard shouts, angry voices rising behind him, footsteps pounding in relentless pursuit. The covert operation had failed. Now his mission was to find his scattered team and hope to survive. Bound for action. Martin R. Watson was born on July 3, 1923, in the quiet towns of Connecticut, USA. But his life was anything but quiet. He was destined for battle, and when World War II broke out, Watson answered the call, joining the 1st Ranger Battalion, an elite light infantry unit known for their daring raids. Watson's early campaigns in northern Africa and Sicily were grueling. As a young sergeant, he saw action in blistering desert heat and treacherous mountain terrain. His squad faced relentless enemy fire, but Watson's quick thinking and resilience marked him as a soldier to be reckoned with. By the time they moved to the European front, he was battle-hardened, but far from done. In the infamous Battle of Cassino in Italy, amid the chaos of the fighting, Watson was captured by German forces. He found himself in the harsh confines of Stalag 2B, a notorious POW camp in Hammerstein, where he spent 15 long months. Desperate to regain his freedom, he attempted a daring escape. For a brief, heart-pounding moment, freedom seemed within reach, only for the guards to catch him just before he could disappear into the wilderness. After his repatriation following World War II, Watson wasn't ready to leave the fight behind. When the Korean War began in June 1950, he volunteered for the 4th Airborne Ranger Infantry Company, eager for another chance to serve and ready to face whatever came next. Fraught plans. In late 1950, one of the 8th Army's primary goals was to sever the enemy's southern supply lines. Operation Virginia was conceived, a daring airborne insertion of American and Korean soldiers into the mountains near Hyunmi. They intended to sabotage a vital railroad tunnel by setting charges at both ends. With limited time, the team was to trek 30 miles southeast, where a coastal boat evacuation awaited, or, if necessary, Navy helicopters, under codename Dallas, would airlift them out. The entire mission had to be completed within 36 hours. Operation Virginia was shadowed by uncertainty from the start. For one thing, the mission's success depended on a fragile alliance between U.S. Army Rangers and South Korean agents, hastily formed just days leading up to the operation's launch. What's more, the Rangers had requested a Pathfinder team to mark the drop zone, but 8th Army planners, fearing compromise, rejected the idea. Instead, the night jump would occur in an unmarked zone amidst the harsh Korean winter. Finally, the original plan called for First Lieutenant Bob Brewer to lead the team. Brewer was more than just a seasoned officer. He possessed intimate knowledge of covert operations in Korea. Knowledge the planners of Operation Virginia belatedly realized they could not afford to risk. The prospect of his capture would compromise not just this mission, but countless others in the region. And so, in a last-minute decision, Brewer was removed from the operation. In his absence, the team found itself leaderless. Baker Section, the command overseeing the mission, faced a fateful choice: cancel the operation or send this newly unbalanced team behind enemy lines with no margin for error. Against all odds, and despite the glaring issues in coordination, the decision was made to press on. The mission was to continue, driven by a sense of urgency that left little room for second-guessing. Fortunately, necessity chooses its own leaders, and Sergeant Martin R. Watson would soon be cornered into the position. Virginia launches. On March 15, 1951, Watson and his team boarded a twin-engine C-47 from the 21st Troop Carrier Squadron, known as the Kyushu Gypsies. Their mission, a dangerous 3-hour flight to a target 250 miles northeast of Busan. With the aircraft's side cargo door removed for their jump, the team was battered by sub-zero winds, their bodies freezing and morale shaken. By the time they reached the drop zone, the frostbitten Rangers and airsick Korean agents were desperate to leap into the unknown. The crew took a last look at the stalwart face of Watson, a man who had long since learned to suppress the tremor of fear that comes with every combat jump. Finally, the C-47's green light blinked on. There was no time for doubt. One by one, the men jumped into the black void. But something had gone terribly wrong. The aircraft, disoriented by the low visibility and bitter weather, had dropped the team 8 miles south of their intended drop zone at Hyunni. The precision they had relied on to stay undetected had vanished in the wind. The exact time frame to complete their mission was now hardly feasible with the extra snow-covered trek ahead. In the maelstrom of the fall, Watson was separated from the others, their figures fading into the swirling snow as they all descended along separate twisting paths. He hit the ground hard, knees buckling under the weight of his gear as he landed in the snow. When he rose to his feet, his worst fears were confirmed. He wasn't alone. Watson had landed in the heart of a North Korean village. He froze for a moment, eyes wide, as he took in the sight of the dimly lit homes around him. Then came the barking. Every dog in the village seemed to erupt at once, their frantic howls cutting through the silence like a blaring alarm. The villagers started stirring, lights flickering on in the small houses. Watson's heart pounded. A white man, a giant compared to the locals, sprinting through their streets in the middle of the night was impossible to miss. But this was no time for hesitation. Watson's survival instincts kicked in, and he made a desperate dash for the cover of the nearby woods. Behind him, the sound of movement told him that the villagers were alert. And soon enough, North Korean forces would be too. He moved quickly, with the snow crunching beneath his boots as he dodged through trees and brush. Somehow, he managed to link up with the rest of his team. They had all landed off course, but they were alive. For now. Sergeant Martin R. Watson's team still had their prime objective: destroy a key railroad tunnel, a lifeline for North Korean supply routes. Intel painted it as lightly defended, far from any major population centers. But as they trudged through knee-deep snow, exhaustion creeping into every step, doubt gnawed at their resolve. The rugged terrain sapped their strength as they navigated through snow-covered mountains, each shadow concealing potential threats. Time slipped away, their mission window narrowing. When they finally reached the tunnel, the truth became clear in a heartbeat. Their intelligence had been catastrophically wrong. The tunnel was heavily fortified. A Chinese railroad repair battalion operated nearby, and sandbag bunkers guarded both tunnel ends, bristling with enemy troops. The mission was compromised. There was no way they could take this target. The team was outnumbered, outgunned, and in the middle of enemy territory, with no way to call for support. Heart-pounding, Watson signaled the retreat. His team had to move out swiftly, knowing one wrong step could trigger an ambush. Operation Virginia was a failure. A desperate rescue. With grim faces, they turned back, setting their sights on the extraction point along the coast. But this time, the mountains were alive with enemy patrols, and the team's journey became a game of cat and mouse. They slogged through the snow for 2 agonizing weeks, constantly evading enemy forces. The bitter cold gnawed at their bones, while hunger and exhaustion wore down their bodies. Every footstep felt heavier than the last, and each night brought the haunting fear of discovery. Watson could feel the weight of their failure pressing down on him, but there was no time for reflection, only survival. They had to reach the coast. As the U.S. Navy's tank landing ship, the LST-799, cruised along the coast, it became the hub for the daring rescue mission. On the evening of March 29th, a helicopter from LST-Q007 landed, joined at dawn by a third from USS St. Paul. By 7:45 a.m. on March 30th, all 3 helicopters were airborne, headed for the pickup site to retrieve Watson and his crew just 20 miles away. 12 F-4U Corsairs from USS Coral Sea roared in, providing air cover and close support. Over the ridge, a C-47 circled as the helicopters made radio contact. They were late. Sergeant Watson and his team were under heavy attack. Tension gripped the air. The pilots were given the choice to abort, with the situation rapidly worsening. They chose to push forward. Engines roared, nerves tightened, and with enemy fire threatening from below, the rescue mission surged ahead, gambling it all on the team's survival and the clock ticking against them. When Watson and his team finally reached the coast, hope flickered in their hearts. The sound of Navy helicopters slicing through the air was the sweetest sound Watson had ever heard. One helicopter swooped in and managed to extract 3 members of the team. Watson quickly assembled his remaining men for extraction. As the second helicopter hovered over the site, Corsairs screamed in, unleashing napalm and cannon fire, pushing the North Koreans back. The helicopter winched up the first 2 Rangers under enemy fire. Just as they moved off, gunfire exploded from the treeline. Watson barely had time to shout a warning before the chopper jolted, struck by North Korean anti-aircraft fire. Flames burst from the engine. Watson held on as the bird spun out of control, plunging toward the ground in a blaze of sparks and shattered metal. The ground was rushing up at them in a dizzying spin. Then, impact. Miraculously, Watson survived the crash, along with the pilot and 5 of the South Korean agents. Now, stranded behind enemy lines with no radio and no way to call for another extraction, their situation was worse than ever. They were on their own. For days, Sergeant Martin R. Watson and his team cautiously navigated hostile terrain, evading capture in a desperate game of survival. Each rustle in the underbrush sent adrenaline coursing through their veins as they dodged enemy patrols. On the 7th day, their luck ran out. The men were skulking along a ridgeline above Yeonggu. Suddenly, North Korean forces ambushed them, seizing Watson and his men. The guards would waste no time, initiating their brutal interrogations. A noble capture. Watson endured relentless questioning, but when the guards failed to break him, they resorted to brutal methods, pushing him to his limits. Despite physical agony and mental strain, he refused to yield. He executed multiple escape attempts, slipping through shadows, only to face recapture and harsher treatment each time. The conditions worsened, pressure mounted, but even in despair, Watson's indomitable spirit persisted. He would not disclose intel. He would never surrender his spirit. He spent 3 long years as a prisoner of war, unwavering in his resolve. For the South Korean agents, the ordeal took an even darker turn. 2 of them managed to escape the prison camp and make their way back to friendly lines, only to be executed by their own military, mistaken for spies. Operation Virginia had been a disaster from the start. For Martin R. Watson, the cost was more than just the failure of a mission. It was the loss of men, the betrayal of allies, years taken off his life, and the brutal reality of war. On September 6, 1953, Sergeant Martin R. Watson was the last U.S. serviceman to be repatriated after the Korean War during Operation Big Switch.